close your eyes for a moment and imagine stepping into a winter night in the Middle Ages, a world without electric heaters, without wall furnaces, without so much as a single warm glow beyond the faint ember left from the day. Outside, the temperature drops so low that your breath turns into pale mist the instant it leaves your lips. And yet, in that frozen darkness, ordinary farmers not only lived, they slept, they endured, and they survived some of the harshest winters in history. How did they stay warm without a heating system? How did they sleep when the wind cut through every crack in the wooden walls? And what gave them peace in a season that felt endless, silent, and bone-deep cold? Tonight, I'm going to take you back into that world. Slow, warm, vivid, like an old lullaby carried through time. You'll walk across deep snow, hear the winter wind slip past the eaves, feel the last breath of a dying fire, and finally drift into sleep beside the humble souls who lived through those long medieval nights. If you're ready for this gentle journey, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe, because our story begins right now. Try closing your eyes for a moment and picture yourself stepping into a winter evening from centuries ago. No engine hums, no electric lights, just the cold, blue-grey breath of an old world where time feels a few heartbeats slower. As your foot presses down on a snow-covered path, the first thing you notice is your own breath rising like little rings of smoke. Each warm exhale drifts past your face, fades into the air, and disappears into the charcoal-purple dusk. The winter wind here doesn't come in raging gusts, but it's sharp enough that even the lightest touch on your skin becomes something you'll remember. It brushes across your cheek, tightens it, almost like a quiet reminder that this place has lived through more winters than you ever will. You take a slow step forward, and the snow beneath your boots releases a deep, muffled sound, a sound that, in the night, feels almost like the earth itself sighing. Ahead, the village road stretches out like a faint ribbon of light. The snow isn't the pure white you see in paintings. It holds a pale, silvery blue tint of late afternoon, a colour born only in winters untouched by electricity. Along the road, older footprints have been blurred by the wind, blending with the new ones you leave behind, giving you the sense that many people have walked here, yet none left a voice. Only your steps, steady, careful, carve out compressed, hushed sounds, as if the snow, too, is holding breath, holding warmth, holding memories for itself. You look around, and a few houses emerge through a thin veil of mist. Thatched roofs dipping low, dark wooden walls, and tiny windows breathing out a faint, tired glow. There aren't many houses, and even fewer lights. Some homes are completely dark, as if the family inside has curled up into the warmest corner they can find, trying to keep the cold from seeping between the wooden seams. The air here carries a very particular kind of solitude, not the kind that makes you sad, but a quiet emptiness, a calmness only places familiar with long winters can possess. You can feel time flowing not by minutes, but by breaths of wind. Everything moves slower, deeper, and every motion becomes part of the landscape. Once in a while, you catch the shadow of someone in the distance, their back slightly bent, their steps quick, as though they need to reach home before darkness settles completely. Their cloak is thick wool, worn and patched, each stitch telling the story of winters survived. Their footsteps are swallowed up by the heavy snow. Any words they might speak are carried off by the wind long before they reach you. And you realize people here have learned to live softly, quietly, saving their strength for the coldest days of the year. As you walk farther into the village, it feels like you're passing through a curtain of time. The scene before you is so simple, so untouched, that it feels like it belongs not just to winter, but to another era entirely. A time when people lived closer to nature, a slower time, a harsher one, but somehow warmer in its own way. There's something in this cold that draws you inward, something that makes you imagine the lives of long-gone generations stirring beneath the thick snow. You don't feel like a stranger here. You feel like someone invited to pause and witness the path humanity once walked. The whole village, with its pale snow, its coal-tinted dusk, and the tiny sparkles of light glowing from each window, looks like a painting the world has kept in its memory for too long. And it's because of this stillness that you begin to feel the cold not as a bite, but as a wide, gentle blanket of nature, wrapping the entire village in the quiet of a winter night. You stand there, inhaling slowly, letting the scent of cold and damp wood slip into your senses. Here, every sense wakes up, not to analyze, but to feel. History, in this moment, is no longer lines on a page. It's breath, wind, dim light flickering behind a window. And then, as you stay long enough to melt into the scene, you sense the story shifting ever so gently. As if from the cold outside, you're being guided towards something warmer, toward the lives of people trying to endure, adapt, and keep the heartbeat of their community alive through the long nights. And from this very moment, you begin stepping into the next part, feeling more clearly the weight of the cold and the quiet resilience of the villagers living through the deepest winter of the medieval age. And as you stand there, on that snow-covered road, fading into the violet of early evening, you begin to notice something beyond the cold, the rhythm of people who have long grown accustomed to a harsh winter. The cold here isn't something that startles anyone. It silently rests on every shoulder, adding a weight that makes every movement measured, restrained, as if everyone is trying to conserve the last traces of warmth their bodies have left. You see a man walking along the road, his wool cloak worn so thin that loose threads at its edges lift gently in the wind. His shoulders are hunched, not out of fatigue, but to keep the cold from slipping down his collar. His steps are quick, yet never rushed, as though he has walked this path thousands of times and knows exactly how slow each footstep must be to avoid slipping. Then you notice a woman carrying a small bundle of firewood. Her steps, too, are quicker than usual, but still full of caution, as if dropping even a single piece of wood would make the coming night colder. She leans her body slightly to one side to balance the load, and you can see a gentle sort of endurance in the way she walks. No resistance, no complaint, only the quiet acceptance of someone who has lived close to nature for far too long. The sounds in the village shift around you. The wind slips through cracks between houses and creates a soft whistling. But everything else, footsteps, voices, hands brushing against wood, becomes muted against the thick layer of snow. The snow here behaves like a vast blanket laid across the earth, quietly absorbing the rough edges of every sound. A child runs by, their small feet sinking into the snow with a sound that feels like the earth breathing, deep and soft. You watch them go, and you realize the silence that surrounds you isn't frightening at all. It's the kind of tranquility older folks cherish on winter mornings, a stillness that settles the heart and slows your breath without effort. You pause, listening. There's no laughter echoing through the village, no market chatter drifting from afar, but there are other sounds. The soft rasp of coarse wool brushing against itself, the warm breath rising from someone's lips, the wind tugging at the edges of a cloak. These sounds aren't loud, but they feel incredibly real, close to the everyday life of people from long ago. People who never had fireplaces that burned hot or glass windows to keep the drafts away. Time in this village moves so slowly that you almost feel yourself slowing with it. Every inhabitant has their own way of moving, yet they all share the same rhythm, the rhythm of those who know that before darkness falls, everyone must finish their small part of the day's work to help their family make it through the night. A man pulls a wooden sled, stacked with a few bundles of straw. An elderly woman tucks her hands deep into her sleeves, taking small but steady steps. Two children huddle against each other to shield themselves from the wind. No one speaks much, no one breathes too fast. There's a calmness woven into their movements, a calmness forged through more winters than we could ever count. In that moment, you understand something. Here, people don't fight the cold, they live with it. Winter isn't an enemy, It's an old guest everyone must make room for, and from that understanding comes a quiet beauty. Even though every back is bent and every step is careful, there is a steady calmness in their eyes, as if each person knows they are doing exactly what they need to do for their community, for their family, for the loved ones waiting for warmth behind thin wooden walls. After a while, when a gust of cold wind brushes your shoulder, you feel the story shifting again. You've been watching them from the outside, witnessing the quiet endurance written in their silhouettes against this heavy winter. And now, like a gentle invitation from the past, you begin walking toward those low-roofed homes, the places where they take refuge, where the last warmth of the day is being guarded. And from that soft, almost instinctive step, the story gently leads you into the next chapter, a place where fragile houses and ancient winter-keeping secrets are waiting for you to discover. As you move closer to the low houses flickering in the dimming light, it feels as though each step is carrying you deeper into the lives of the people who once lived here. The wind is still blowing, gentle yet sharp, brushing a thin layer of numbness across your face. And in that exact moment, the shapes of the houses come into clearer focus. The fragile shells medieval villagers relied on to withstand their long, unforgiving winters. The wattle and daub walls rise before you with a rough, uneven texture, like the wrinkles of time itself. Thin rods and strips of woven wood form a lattice beneath the surface, packed over with layers of clay mixed with straw, smeared on by hand, thin but persistent. It's the kind of material people could make with what their world offered, the soil beneath their feet and the straw gathered from the fields just beyond their doorsteps. You reach out and let your hand hover near the surface, not touching it completely, just close enough to feel it. The cold radiates from the wall like the breath of the earth, slow but penetrating. You immediately understand why these walls never held heat well. They absorb moisture, and despite all the careful smearing and patching, there are always tiny passages where the wind can slip through. Yet within that fragility lies a strange kind of beauty, the beauty of something humble yet sincere. These homes weren't built to confront nature, but to coexist with it, just like the people who lived inside them. You begin noticing small wooden statues placed beside many doorways. The faint golden glow from within the houses spills over them, revealing simple carvings, round faces, wide eyes, vague smiles that seem halfway between unfinished and eternal. Some statues resemble guardians, others look like foxes, deer, or creatures that only folklore could name. The villagers believed these carvings could push back the cold, keeping the harsh wind from slipping straight into the house, not with force, but with spirit. To them, winter wasn't only freezing air, it was the domain of mist spirits, pale drifting shapes carried in the wind, said to chill a person to the bone. Then there were the wind ghosts, described by the shrill whistles weaving through rooftops at midnight, and the winter sprites, dim, uncertain forms hidden in the shadows, feared and believed in equally by the village children. Listening to these beliefs, you don't feel afraid. If anything, you feel touched. When survival becomes fragile, people search for something, anything, to anchor their hope. A small wooden figure by the door, a quiet faith that someone or something is keeping watch over the cold on their behalf. All around the village, traces of handmade winter defences remain visible, moss stuffed into cracks in the walls, fresh patches of clay smeared over places where frost forced the earth to split, wooden braces set against the outside to weaken the wind's impact. Every detail speaks of tireless effort not to defeat winter, but to live fully within it. The wind brushes your shoulder again, carrying the scent of damp wood and distant hearth smoke. You hear the soft thud of a door closing, then silence returns. Not an empty silence, but one filled with the warmth of quiet human attempts to endure. Standing there before a wattle and daub home, you suddenly realize that every rough wall is a story of medieval people who had no better materials, no grand stoves, no glass windows, yet they built their shelters from everything they had. soil, straw, wood, and trust in the support of the community. The cold still hangs heavy here, but within that weight lies a quiet beauty. It's the beauty of simplicity and endurance, something only those who have lived through many seasons of hardship could fully appreciate. You inhale slowly, letting the scent of soil and straw settle deep in your senses like an old memory carried through generations. And from that stillness, the story seems to beckon you further, no longer to stand outside examining fragile walls, but to step inside, where an entire family is carefully preserving their last warmth for the long night ahead. The moment lingers, the wind pauses, the house waits, and right in that gentle hush, you lower your head and step over the small threshold, letting the dim wooden doorway frame your entry into the next chapter. The cramped darkness and fragile warmth inside a medieval home. The world you're about to witness in Part 4. You lower your body slightly and step through the small doorway, and immediately you feel the difference between outside and inside. The cold is still there, clinging faintly like mist settled on your cloak, but it has lost its sharpness. It becomes a background chill, blending into the gentle warmth drifting from a corner of the room. The first light you notice doesn't come from flames, but from a small, glowing ember resting in a shallow hearth at the center of the house. Its glow isn't bright enough to reveal every detail, yet it casts faint patches of light across the walls, like tired halos left behind after a long day. From a crack in the door, a sliver of blue evening light filters in, only to be stopped by the silhouettes of the simple tools propped beside it. You stand still for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the darkness. The space is smaller than you expected. The entire house is just one room, a place for cooking, sleeping, and doing whatever small handwork needs to be done. Everything happens here, within these few square feet, as if the family has gathered all their warmth, their light, their breath, and their worries into one shared heart. The smell inside is unmistakable, not unpleasant, just the complete scent of living. Damp earth from the wattle and door walls, straw from the sleeping area, smoke clinging to wool clothing, and the faint trace of sweat from people who have worked since morning. All of it blends into a warm, familiar atmosphere, the kind of scent you would recognize instantly if you'd ever grown up in an old rural village. Beside the hearth, a few short wooden stools rest on the floor, their surfaces worn smooth from years of use. One stool leans slightly, as if it has been repaired too many times. A soot-darkened clay pot sits near the fire pit, still carrying the herbal scent of the evening meal. You can almost imagine the careful hands that have stirred that pot hundreds of times through long winters, as predictable and comforting as the rhythm of breathing. In the corner hangs a bundle of herbs tied with coarse flax string. Their scent, slightly sharp, slightly sweet, drifts through the air, a small attempt to mask the dampness creeping into the wooden frame of the house. These bundles aren't only for driving away insects, they serve a deeper purpose. They're reminders that even in the harshest winters, nature always keeps a few gifts aside for those who know where to look. You step further inside, and the first thing you feel is the closeness of the space. Yet it's a comforting closeness. Every part of the room is filled with some trace of daily life. A small table scattered with wooden tools, a few woolen shoes by the door, an old woven basket with frayed edges. Together, they tell a quiet story, a story of a small family living by their labor and their hope, day after day, through winters that must have felt endless. A faint sound breaks the stillness, perhaps wood contracting from the cold, or the wind slipping through a crack in the wall. The sound doesn't startle you. In fact, it makes the room feel more alive. You begin to realize that in ancient homes, silence was never truly silent. It was the whisper of the space itself, the shifting of objects, the settling of walls, the soft breath of the hearth fighting to hold onto its warmth. You kneel slightly and look at the glowing ember, a tiny light, but the beating heart of this whole house. There's no need for a roaring fire. just a handful of embers, warm enough to promise the family one more night. You imagine them sitting here around the hearth, warming their hands, then preparing their bedding, curling under heavy blankets, relying on each other's body heat to keep the cold at bay. The tightness and darkness of the room no longer feel confining. Instead, something in your chest softens, as if this simplicity is wrapping its arms around you like an old story, whispering that long ago people lived just as you do, breathed as you do, sought warmth in the same tender, human way you do. You inhale deeply, letting the scent of smoke and earth drift into your lungs, light as the memory it resembles. And when you sweep your gaze across the room again, you realize that the warmth of this home doesn't come solely from the ember, but from the quiet strategies the family uses to preserve that ember through the night. They push ashes over the coals to help them last longer. They place stones near the fire so the stones can hold heat until dawn. They drape extra cloth near the sleeping corner to trap warmth. None of these things are dramatic. None are enough to make the house truly warm. But each is a small act of resilience, a reminder that survival is often built from countless little gestures carried out with patience and love. And from that realization, the story begins to shift again. Not abruptly, but gently, like a soft hand guiding you deeper into the night. Because the ember in this small hearth is only the beginning. There is a fire waiting to be understood. Not a blazing one, but a humble, flickering flame that families must keep alive no matter how cold the world becomes. And with that quiet invitation, the story leads you forward to the next chapter, the faint, stubborn kitchen fire and the ancient tricks used to keep those precious coals burning through the long winter nights. You move closer to the small hearth in the center of the house, the only source of light in the room. When you look at it more closely, you realize this isn't a stove the way we think of one today. It's simply a round pit pressed into the earth, its rim lined with dark, time-worn stones. On its surface lies a thick layer of ash, soft as powder, covering the faint red embers still glowing underneath. The glow is not strong. It pulses like a tired heartbeat after a long winter's day, brightening, fading, brightening again. But in this tiny home, that small flicker is enough to make the space feel warmer than it has any right to be. You settle beside the hearth, and a gentle warmth rises toward your hands. Not a blazing heat, not the fierce kind that pushes back the cold, just a quiet warmth, steady and humble, like the touch of an old hand resting gently on your shoulder. Slow, persistent, full of affection. You notice bits of herbs mixed into the ash, a few dried sage leaves, some thyme sprigs, and occasionally an old bay leaf. The villagers scattered these herbs into the ash, not only for their scent. Sage helps absorb moisture, keeping the ash from clumping overnight. Thyme warms the air with its earthy fragrance, softening the smell of damp soil. And bay leaves, a household favorite, were believed to ward off bad spirits and wicked winds. Each of these little tricks was passed down through generations, much like the way our grandparents shared their own methods for tending wood-fired stoves and keeping embers alive through the night. As you look more closely at the layer of ash, you notice a shallow depression at the center, the mark of an old technique, ember burying. In medieval villages, families rarely built up roaring flames at night. Firewood was scarce, tightly controlled by feudal lords. Some forests were strictly forbidden, and cutting wood without permission could mean harsh punishment, fines, confiscation, even losing what little you owned. So they had to preserve fire at all costs, not to warm the whole house, but to ensure they could rekindle a flame come morning without wasting precious wood. The embers were buried beneath the ash, shielded from the wind, the heat trapped for hours. The ash became a thin blanket protecting the last warmth of the day. You can picture the homeowner later tonight, before lying down to sleep, taking a small stick and gathering the glowing embers into the deepest part of the pit. Then they would shovel ash on top, layer after careful layer, slow, gentle, deliberate. By the time they finished, the hearth would barely glow at all, leaving just a single, faint red dot, like a patient eye watching over the family through the dark. A strange peace settles over you. In the heavy blackness of a medieval winter night, a small ember like this meant not only warmth, but courage. There were nights when the wind raged violently, when the walls turned so cold the water on the roof might freeze. But as long as they saw that faint red light beneath the ash, the family knew they weren't completely alone. Anyone who has lived a long life knows this truth well. Often, what gets us through our hardest moments isn't a blazing fire, but the smallest bit of warmth we can hold on to. You let your gaze linger on the ember, breathing in rhythm with its tiny pulses of light. The house is still cold, but not cold enough to make you tremble. There's a subtle warmth spreading through the air, a warmth born from persistence, from saving every stick of wood, from the hands that knew how to nurture heat, even when almost nothing was left. You can almost hear what tomorrow morning will sound like, the homeowner reaching into this very pit, nestling a dry twig against the embers, blowing gently, slowly, until the new flame sparks to life. And then, the house will glow again. A sudden gust of wind rattles the outside wall, nudging you slightly, and, in that moment, you realize you've been sitting long enough to feel the rhythm of this fire, a rhythm built not from abundance, but from care. And from this fragile little hearth, the story opens into a deeper layer, not only how they preserved heat in the fire pit, but how they preserved warmth within the very architecture of their homes, through every beam, every stone, every tightly packed crevice. And from that quiet, enduring warmth, the story gently guides you onward to the next chapter. The architectural secrets of staying warm. Low ceilings, tight seams, and heat-holding stones, waiting for you to uncover in part 6. You sit by the hearth for a while, letting the warmth from the tiny ember seep slowly into your hands. And when you finally rise, the faint red glow follows your gaze around the room, revealing corners you hadn't noticed before. This is the moment you realize something important. It isn't only the hearth that keeps the people here warm, it's the house itself. Humble, rough, unadorned, built with intention, every inch of it shaped to withstand winter. The ceiling is so low that if you straightened your back fully, the wooden beams might sit just above the top of your head. But in that modest height lies a quiet wisdom. A low ceiling traps heat closer to the ground, gathering what warmth there is around the living space, rather than letting it drift upward and disappear. You can almost imagine the family, on the coldest nights, huddling together under this low roof, as though nestled inside a nest crafted jointly by nature and human hands. You lift your eyes and see the dark wooden beams crossing overhead. Tangled in them are a few clumps of dry straw, a natural layer of insulation, stopping the wind from cutting through the roof. Each beam carries scratches, cracks, marks of time worn deep into the grain. But that age, that wear, is part of what makes them beautiful. Nothing here pretends to be new. Everything simply is, honest, sturdy in its own way. Then your gaze drops to the walls. Every tiny gap in the wattle and daub has been sealed with whatever the villagers could find. Dry moss stuffed between wooden slats, patches of mud smeared thickly over cracks, and in some places, scraps of old wool that had thinned too much to be worn. Sometimes even a torn piece of cloth from a shirt long past its use. Nothing goes to waste. Nothing is too small to help keep the warmth inside. You run your fingers lightly across one of the mud-sealed gaps and feel the roughness against your skin. Beneath the mud lies straw, beneath the straw lies woven wood, and beyond all that, the wind. And the people who lived here fought off that wind with every hardened fingertip and every ounce of patient labor. You step forward slowly, sensing the floor beneath you. It isn't wood, nor is it packed dirt. Instead, it's made of large stone slabs laid tightly together. The surface feels cool, but not as cold as you expect. You crouch down and press your palm against it, and a faint warmth greets you, soft and steady. These stones had been warmed before being set in place, or left near the fire throughout the day to absorb heat. When night came, they released that small reservoir of warmth, keeping the floor from numbing the feet of the family. To you, it might feel like a mild, fleeting heat. But to those who lived through winters that lasted more than half the year, this warmth was a treasure, something that kept their bodies from freezing the moment they stepped out of bed. You realize nothing in this house is accidental. Every clump of moss, every tightly fitted stone, every reinforced beam, each one is part of a quiet, desperate strategy to keep the cold at bay. Winter winds in the medieval world didn't only bite, they weakened, they exhausted, they brought a lingering chill that could make an entire family fall ill within days. So blocking the wind wasn't comfort, it was survival. You picture the family at the start of every winter, performing their annual ritual, the adults patching mud over new cracks, the children gathering moss from the woods to press into the walls, the young lifting stones and adjusting them so the gaps in the floor stayed tight. It wasn't just labor, it was tradition, a passing down of responsibility, of care for the home that sheltered them. You stand still, listening. The wind outside still presses against the house, still hunts for openings, but each time it slips through a small gap, it hits moss or wool or mud, and the sound softens, loses its sharpness. In that muted sigh of the wind, you understand the truth. This place is the result of generations of patience and careful tending. The warmth here doesn't come from one source. It comes from dozens of tiny choices, each one made to protect the people who lived within these fragile walls. It is warmth born from perseverance, the kind that makes your chest loosen, your breathing slow, your heart settle. You exhale slowly. Your breath drifts upward, meets the low ceiling, and dissolves into the old wooden beams instead of vanishing into the wide, cold night. And in that moment, you feel something profound, the warmth of community. Not through temperature, but through the care woven into every detail of the home. And when you return to the hearth, the ember waiting quietly in its nest of ash, you understand the story is ready to move on, ready to lead you away from architecture and into experience, into what it truly feels like to live through a winter night in this house, with its breath, its wood sighs, its wind whispers, and the soft ache of cold pressing at the edges. And from that gentle warmth, the story guides you onward to the next chapter, a night inside the house, listening to the breath of winter, the creaking of wood, the whispering wind, and the quiet that sinks into the heartbeat of the home. As you stand in the dim, quiet room, the warmth from the stones beneath your feet still lingering against your skin, you begin to notice something that medieval people understood better than anyone. The night has a voice of its own. Not a voice meant to frighten, but one reserved for those who know how to listen, slowly, deeply. You catch the sound of the wood first. As the temperature outside drops, the wooden beams of the roof begin to speak in their subtle way, tiny groans like someone shifting in their sleep. Sometimes a dry, sharp crack, sometimes a long exhale from a beam shrinking under the cold. This house isn't silent at all. It's conversing with winter in a language it has spoken for centuries in villages just like this. Outside, the wind slips through whatever cracks remain. It isn't fierce. It doesn't tear or howl. It glides, a long, low whistle that threads through the upright walls, sweeps past the low door frame, brushes the edge of the hearth, then fades like the sigh of something ancient. You don't feel afraid. If anything, that wind feels like a familiar old guest patrolling the night, whistling softly as it passes by. You take a few slow steps, and then you hear the sounds rising from the small livestock shelter beneath the floorboards. A cow shifts its weight, and the straw rustles gently. A goat lets out a soft hum, so faint it feels like a dream. Somewhere near the roof, perhaps a little mouse scurries, searching for a warmer corner, leaving behind a delicate scratch lost almost immediately to the darkness. None of these sounds sharpen your senses. Instead, they stroke the room with quiet life. a tired, persistent rhythm that mirrors the people who live in this world, slow, worn, and endlessly patient. You breathe in deeply, and as you exhale, you watch your white breath drift into the dark. In this low-roofed house, your breath mixes with the breath of the wood, the stones, the animals, and even the wind outside. Together, they weave a soft, quiet symphony, each sound a tiny beat in the long passage of time. Then, suddenly, you notice the silence. Not the frightening kind, but a silence that seeps into you, the kind that makes your shoulders loosen on their own, the kind that makes your eyelids heavy, the kind that melts your thoughts into slow, dissolving lines until they fade into something calmer, gentler. In that silence, you feel yourself grow small, but not in a way that diminishes you. It's a humble smallness, a peaceful kind, because you understand, in this moment, that your ancestors lived exactly like this. They didn't resist the winter night. They didn't fight the dark. They settled into it. They accepted themselves as small points of warmth in the vast canvas of nature. You look toward the door, where a pale blue sliver of light still slips through. Outside, winter is breathing. Inside, the house is breathing too. And you stand between these two breaths, quietly, as if placed inside a moment that doesn't quite belong to time. A roof beam cracks again, this time longer, deeper. You don't flinch. You know it's just the house, telling you the night is growing colder, that winter is settling in inch by inch. Just like a sleeping person murmurs or shifts, this house has its own nighttime vocabulary, a simple kind of life that has sounded the same 1,000 years ago and will still sound the same 1,000 years from now. Medieval winter nights aren't loud, but they're filled with tiny melodies that slow the heart and soften the spirit. They teach you, without words, how humble humans are before the force of nature. Fragile, yes. Small, yes, but never alone. And as you sit back down near the ember, quietly glowing in its nest of ash, you sense the story deepening. It has shown you the sounds of the night, the breath of the house, the whispered life in the walls and floorboards. Now it wants to take you further, past the sounds, into the warmth people created together, into the ways humans leaned on each other to survive, into the quiet rituals of body heat, closeness, and comfort that helped families endure night after night. And from this softened, listening moment, the story gently ushers you toward the next part, the warmth of gathered bodies, the ancient practice of sleeping together to survive, waiting for you to experience. As you sit quietly inside the low, dim house, listening to the wind slip through the cracks and the roof timbers creak in the cold, you begin to realize something deeper. The warmth in this place doesn't come only from the hearth or the stones beneath your feet. The most vital warmth, the warmth that carried people through the winter alive, came from human bodies gathered close together. After a while, the family begins preparing their sleeping space. You watch as they smooth out the pile of dry straw, patting it flat to form a thin mattress. The sound of straw shifting is soft, like pages of an old book turning slowly. They spread coarse linen cloths over it, faded, frayed at the corners, but folded with care, as if each one were a precious heirloom. Then they begin to lie down, not separately, but all together on one large bed, or rather, a shared nest of straw. The strongest adult sleeps on the outer edge, where the cold can slip in most easily. Beside him lies his wife, and at the center, like small candles needing shelter, the children are placed where the warmth is strongest. You imagine the moment they pull the heavy wool blanket over themselves, the blanket so weighty it takes both hands to lift. As soon as it settles, heat begins to rise between their bodies. There is no method of insulation more effective than this. The warmth of living people is the most natural and enduring source of heat they have. The children curl in tight, their heads touching the shoulders of the adults. You can almost hear their breathing, short, light, like little waves brushing against the shore. The adults' breaths are slower, deeper, and as the rhythms merge, the whole room seems to grow warmer. When many bodies lie close together, a faint humidity fills the air. Not the unpleasant kind, but a warm, human humidity you may have felt once while holding a child or sitting beside a relative on a snowy day. The space around them softens, dark but not lonely, cold but not biting. Watching this scene, the deeper meaning becomes clear. In the heart of a harsh winter, survival isn't about isolation. It's about closeness, about sharing breath, sharing heat, sharing the quiet companionship of simply being alive together. The idea of a family bed isn't strange at all. For centuries across Europe, in the frozen lands of Scandinavia, in the alpine villages of the high mountains, from Scotland to Bavaria, families slept exactly like this. It was a tradition passed from generation to generation, not merely as a matter of survival, but as a source of comfort, a primal sense of safety that made sleep deeper, steadier. You can imagine what it was like for a child to grow up in those times, every night hearing the soft breathing of their mother, the shifting weight of their father, the unconscious murmurs of siblings in their sleep. These sounds formed an invisible wall around them, warding off the cold, the fear of darkness, the long whistling wind beyond the door. And then, as that child grew older, they would eventually take their place at the outer edge, shielding the next generation in the same way, continuing the circle of warmth without end. You watch the imaginary family settle in, and you feel yourself drifting into that same heavy wool blanket, hearing those shared breaths blend, sensing warmth ripple from one person to the next like gentle tides. It is simplicity at its most profound. Warmth not born from wealth or tools, but from closeness, from the most basic truth of human life. We survive by leaning on one another. You exhale slowly, your own heartbeat falling into step with theirs. And when your eyes drift toward the corner of the house, you realize that this shared bed is just one part of the minimal but essential items that allowed them to sleep through the winter.
The night will be long, and in that long night, warmth won't come only from human bodies. The wool blankets, the layers of straw, the old linen cloths, all of them contribute to holding on to every last bit of heat.
And from the soft glow of that circle of human warmth, the story gently guides you into the next chapter, where coarse wool blankets, humble fabrics, and simple bedding, the essential tools of sleep, are waiting for you to touch with your imagination. As the family settles together on the shared bed, you notice something striking. The place where they lie is not a feather mattress, nor a sturdy wooden frame like you'd find today. What supports them, and now supports your imagination, is a layer of dry straw spread evenly over the stone floor. You listen to the sound of the straw shifting beneath their weight. It gives off tiny, crackling whispers, like old papers being turned under a lantern's glow. The straw isn't soft, but it isn't unpleasant either. It has a natural springiness, able to hold a bit of the warmth radiating from their bodies. You can picture the mother of the household gathering the straw earlier that afternoon, pushing it into a neat pile for the night. Straw must be replaced regularly. Winter moisture slowly stiffens it, and the gentle rustling grows sharper, more brittle. These small tasks, clearing, spreading, replacing, quietly create the warmth winter always tries to steal. On top of the straw, they lay coarse linen cloths. You notice tiny tears, mismatched patches, faint stains washed so many times the fibers have softened and blurred. Yet, in this house, these linen sheets are treasures, woven thread by thread with time, labor, and the steady patience of the women of the family. Linen isn't warm, but it keeps the bed clean, prevents skin from brushing directly against the straw, and most importantly, it carries the scent of the hands that wove it, a scent faint, real, unmistakably human. But then, your eyes move to the thing that gives the bed its true warmth, the heavy wool blanket. It isn't soft like modern comforters. It doesn't billow or fluff. Instead, it presses down with a comforting weight, as if it's wrapping its arms around whoever lies beneath it. Medieval wool blankets were woven from the thick fleece of hardy sheep from cold regions. They were coarse, a bit scratchy, but it was their density that kept people alive through freezing nights. Some parts of the blanket are patched, cross-stitched repairs, scraps of old wool sewn over bare spots, lines of thread that run crooked and straight like the history of the family itself. Every patch feels like a memory sewn back into place. And when the blanket is pulled over the bodies, warmth begins to spread, not instantly, but slowly, deliberately, like a cup of hot tea set beside a frosty window, its warmth seeping outward one gentle breath at a time. You close your eyes in your imagination and feel it, the warmth blooming layer by layer, creeping into your fingers, filling the spaces beneath your clothing. For older viewers, this warmth might echo the memory of a thick, sun-dried quilt from childhood, heavy, fragrant, reassuring. On especially long nights, people placed small herb sachets beneath their blankets or near their pillows. Inside were wild lavender, rosemary sprigs, or dried mint leaves. These kept insects away, yes, but more importantly, their scents softened the loneliness of the winter dark. And as you imagine lying down on that bed of straw, resting your head on the coarse linen, pulling the heavy wool blanket across your chest, you hear the straw shifting beneath you, feel the warmth rising slowly, and understand the delicate simplicity of life long ago. Medieval people didn't have much, but they knew how to turn the little they had into warmth, warmth enough to make it through one more season. You exhale, and your breath seems to merge with the faint scent of herbs drifting through the air. In that moment, you understand something deeper about the philosophy of your ancestors. True warmth doesn't come from objects alone, but from connection, to the person beside you, to the old bedding that has sheltered your family, to the home that has carried you through the cold. And as your eyes drift back to the shared bed, you notice another detail. The layers of clothing they still wear as they sleep. Wool tunics, thick socks, long coats, all adding to the insulation. They do not sleep in modern naked ease, but in the protective layers that serve as their second skin. And from that warmth rising slowly beneath the wool blanket, the story gently guides you toward the next chapter, where the clothing itself, the survival shell they wore to bed, will tell the next part of how medieval people stayed warm in a world ruled by winter. As you watch the family lying close together beneath the heavy wool blanket, you suddenly notice a detail that seems small, but is far more important than it appears. They keep their clothes on while they sleep. No one removes a coat, no one shrugs off their thick layers the way people do today. And it isn't out of stiffness or habit. It's how they protect themselves from the cold lurking just beyond the wooden walls. In the medieval world, people believed, and experience proved, that when the body loses heat, it loses it fastest through bare skin. So keeping clothing on at night was a matter of survival. You look at the wool garments they wear, thick, uneven strands, colours faded through countless seasons, collars roughened by friction, sleeves patched with threads that don't match. But when you imagine slipping your hand into that coarse wool, you can almost feel the warmth spreading outward, a dense, earthy warmth, so different from modern fabrics. Wool resists moisture, holds heat, and carries a scent like no synthetic material ever will, a faint mix of old flax, sheep's lanolin, and the lingering aroma of a smoky kitchen fire, like winter mornings in an old countryside home. The father wears a knee-length wool tunic, lightly fastened with a fabric belt. His thick, hand-knit socks reach high on his calves, and his coarse leather boots rest beside the bed, ready for dawn's biting cold. The mother's clothing is similar, shorter coat but more layers, a fabric belt drawn snug to trap warmth, wool socks pulled nearly to her knees. You notice the patches stitched onto their clothing, some large, some tiny, some cut from garments worn by earlier generations. These patches don't make the clothes ragged, they give them age, memory, and purpose. A single garment might survive more winters than a person could count, passed from father to son, mother to daughter, mended again and again until every stitch tells a piece of the family's story. When the family lies down, those layers become a second wall, a living barrier against the cold. You can imagine the warmth rising from their bodies, caught by the thick wool, slowly seeping into the blanket and returning back to the skin in a natural cycle of heat. No need for a great fireplace. No need for regulated room temperatures. Just the old wool clothing, thick enough, tough enough, familiar enough. And when you imagine yourself wrapped in that same fabric, you feel the warmth spreading through you, not like heat, but like a gentle protection. It resembles a memory that many older Americans might recognize. The feeling of being bundled into a hand-knit wool sweater by a mother or grandmother on the first snowy morning of the year. A warmth passed from one person to another. You lower your gaze to the woven belts. They aren't decorative. They keep clothing tight to the body, stopping cold drafts from sneaking in. The boots sitting at the foot of the bed serve the same purpose. Untreated leather, not waterproof, but essential for stepping outside at dawn when frost still bites the earth. In the dimness of the room, you feel it clearly. Clothing wasn't an accessory. It was life. A small but enduring wall between the body and a winter that could take everything. You hear the wind lift again across the roof, but it no longer feels menacing, because you understand something now. Medieval people didn't dream of escaping winter. They learned to live within it, with blankets, straw beds, shared warmth, and the wool garments wrapped tightly around their bodies like quiet guardians. You breathe out slowly, and your breath seems to settle into the imaginary wool draped over your shoulders. In this peaceful moment, you realize there is still another source of heat, one most people overlook, yet one that meant survival for countless families. The warmth of the animals living right beneath the floor. And from that gentle awareness, the story leads you softly into the next chapter, where livestock, the silent companions of medieval life, offer their quiet, living warmth to the people above. As you sit in the softened darkness of the little house, wrapped in the thick wool layers, you feel a strange warmth at your feet, a warmth you couldn't quite name at first. It isn't from the hearth, it isn't from the circle of bodies sleeping close together. It is a warmth rising from beneath the floor, steady and subtle, like the slow heartbeat of the natural world itself. You lean down and touch the stone slab again. The warmth there feels deeper now, richer than when you first stepped inside. And in that moment, you understand. Just beneath this cold stone lies the slumbering mass of livestock, great, breathing bodies at rest. In the medieval world, homes were often built in two simple layers, people above, animals directly below, not for convenience, not for efficiency, but because the breath and body heat of cows, goats, and sheep, large, sturdy creatures, produced more warmth than one might expect. At night, when the cold wind swept across the village, these animals curled into their straw nests, exhaling thick white breaths that collected and drifted upward. Through gaps in the wooden boards and the seams between stone slabs, that heat rose like a muted, natural blessing. You close your eyes and listen. There's the rustle of straw beneath you, perhaps a cow shifting its weight. There's the almost whisper bleat of a goat, so soft it dissolves into the dark, and every now and then, the steady tap of hooves against wooden planks, like a gentle knock of wind at the door. These sounds don't disturb you. They soothe. They feel like the low, patient breathing of the earth, carried upward through the floor in soft threads of sound, never sharp, never sudden. On winter nights, those animals became part of the household, not just as food or property, but as companions in humankind's quiet struggle against the cold. You picture the farmhand earlier that evening, checking each cow, each goat, pushing more straw beneath them, laying a hand along a furry back as a silent goodnight, a small ritual of gratitude between species that depended on each other to survive. In old villages, people even believed each family had a barn guardian spirit, a protective soul dwelling in the shape of some humble creature. It watched over the animals and, by extension, the people themselves. No one claimed to see it, but everyone felt its presence in the warmth that rose each night from the stables below. You sit still and absorb that warmth. Not clean, not pure, nothing like modern heating, but profoundly human. It is the warmth of life, the warmth of beings who share your shelter, your land, your long winter, the warmth of a world where humans and animals depended on one another, not in theory, but through every breath through the planks beneath your feet. When you open your eyes again, the darkness of the house feels noticeably less cold, and you realize that although no one ever said it out loud, families like this, just like millions across the medieval world, didn't love their animals simply for their usefulness. They loved them because they were, in a quiet and literal way, part of the warmth of human survival. You inhale slowly, letting your breath blend into the rising heat from below. And once again, as with every chapter of this winter night, you are reminded that warmth rarely comes from grand gestures. It comes from the simplest things: a cow breathing deeply, a goat shifting in its sleep, straw rustling like a lullaby from the world beneath your feet. You let that warmth seep into your chest, and then you sense it, that subtle shift in the story, that turning point every medieval family knew too well, the moment when the house is left with no flame. And from that faint warmth rising upward, the story guides you gently into the next chapter. The quiet hour, when the fire dies, darkness closes in, and the final efforts to preserve even the smallest margin of warmth begin. You can still feel the quiet warmth rising from the animals beneath the floor when, across the room, the light from the hearth begins to fade. At first, it's barely noticeable. The glowing ember dims just a little, the tiny flicker of flame shrinking in on itself, like someone tired pulling a blanket closer before falling asleep. Then, slowly, painfully slowly, the light gathers into a single small pulse, dark red like a heartbeat that beats only once every few breaths. You watch grey ash fall over it, covering the ember the way snow settles atop the earth outside, and in that moment, you understand. The house is about to enter the coldest part of the winter night. When the flame finally goes out, darkness doesn't rush in. It comes like mist, thin, cold, slipping through every crack in the wall. You feel it brushing along your collar, travelling down the spine in a slow shiver, spreading beneath the wool blanket the way water spreads under a door. The walls grow sharper with cold. The stone floor hardens as though the winter itself is tightening its grip. Without the fire, the darkness in the room grows heavier, layering itself like a thick cloak. In this moment, the mother of the family usually bends over the hearth, using a small stick to gather whatever embers remain. If she is lucky, there are still 2 or 3 tiny glowing coals left. She draws them together into a small clay pot, then buries them under a layer of ash, preserving just enough heat to revive the flame tomorrow without wasting precious wood. Those ember pots are passed from one generation to another. A pot with living coals means the morning won't be so bitter. A pot that has gone cold means the coming day will be harder. You see the mother lifting the clay pot, her hands chapped and trembling from the cold, and yet there is a quiet perseverance in the way she moves, the same way people always clutch the smallest hope in the darkest hours. Not every family has enough wood to burn long into the night. In medieval times, wood-cutting rights belonged to the landowner. Villagers could only gather fallen branches or beg for scraps. Anyone caught stealing timber faced harsh punishment, the kind that could haunt a family all winter long. You feel the weight of that injustice, not with anger, but with a silent ache. The kind of truth that clings to a village for centuries, the way frost clings to a rooftop. Poor families would sometimes have nights without any fire at all, no red glow cast onto the walls, no warmth rising from the hearth, only pure darkness, the kind that makes you hear your own heartbeat. You try to imagine that feeling, not terror but emptiness, like sitting in a familiar room when the lights suddenly go out. You still know where everything is, but the darkness makes each object feel just a little farther away. The family shifts closer together, without speaking. No one wishes to disturb the fragile stillness that comes when the fire dies. You hear the father cough softly, the children turn in their sleep, the steady breathing that tries to stay calm. The darkness shrinks the world down to the breath beside you, the blanket on your body, the wind brushing against the roof. And then you realize something profound. It is the very absence of light that makes them treasure warmth so fiercely. The warmth of another human body, the warmth of the animals beneath the floor, the warmth inside the little ember pot held carefully in the mother's hands. You breathe in deeply, and for a moment you feel as though you are sitting inside that medieval house, waiting out the night, waiting for warmth to return, waiting for the faint promise of morning. Because even when the fire has died, the family performs their familiar nightly rituals, gentle, quiet motions that help them feel safe in the long stretch of winter darkness. And from the stillness of that extinguished fire, the story shifts once more, leading you softly into the next chapter, the simple, sacred bedtime rituals, the quiet routines that carried medieval families safely into sleep. After the mother tucks the ember pot into the corner of the hearth and the darkness fills the room, every sound seems to soften by 1 degree. Yet within that hush, you begin to hear small movements, subtle and deeply human, the little motions that signal the closing of a long day. The father rises first. He reaches for the rough broom leaning against the wall, then sweeps a slow, deliberate circle around the house. The broom brushes across the stone floor with a steady sh-sh sound, not forceful, not rushed, but more like someone dusting away the final crumbs of the day's troubles. In the old world, sweeping at night wasn't for cleaning alone. It was believed to ward off illness, insects, and to clear the spirit before sleep. You watch the gesture and sense a peace in its rhythm, the kind of quiet calm our modern lives rarely leave room for anymore. When the sweeping is done, the mother takes a small bowl of water from the table. The water is icy. Having sat near the drafty door all day, she dips her hands in, then gently washes her face, and you can almost feel the sting of cold spreading across her skin. But that sharpness awakens the body just enough, preparing it for a deeper, steadier rest. She passes the bowl around. The child dips their hands in, recoiling quickly with a tiny shiver, then bravely tries again. Despite the cold, each person performs this ritual, as if washing away dust, fatigue, and the biting chill clinging to them from the long hours in the fields. Then comes the settling of the sleeping space. The father straightens the heavy wool blanket, making sure no corner is folded in a way that might let a draft sneak inside. The mother kneels at the low door and pushes bits of cloth into the cracks, patient and precise. The child rearranges the little herb sachets hanging near the bed, wild lavender, dried rosemary, a few brittle mint leaves, their scent softening the loneliness of winter nights. These herb bundles aren't just for fragrance. In old folk belief, they were peace charms, meant to keep misfortune away, ward off illness, and bring calm into the home. People didn't overthink whether it was true. They believed, and that belief itself brought comfort. In the dimness, you see the mother place a small sachet at the head of the bed, then exhale softly, as if the scent helps her release a worry she's carried all day. You realize that these rituals, sweeping the floor, washing the face, smoothing the blankets, sealing the door cracks, hanging the herbs, aren't chores. They are anchors, tiny, familiar acts that help people feel they've done everything possible to prepare for the long night. In an age without light switches, without automatic heating, every motion is a quiet reminder. You've done your part. Now it's time to rest. You hear the floor settle under the father's weight as he returns to the bed. The house grows orderly, still, as though it, too, is preparing to sleep alongside the family. You feel as if the house itself is drawing a long, slow breath and letting it go, matching the rhythm of the people nestled within its walls. And then your eyes drift to where the children sit waiting, their eyes half closed, tiny hands clutching an old piece of wool cloth. On nights like this, children are always the center of the family's circle of warmth, and that, you sense, is exactly where the story is guiding you next. And from the gentle peace of these rituals, the story carries you softly into the next chapter, where the children, the family's little flames, wait to be drawn into the warm heart of the winter night. Once every evening ritual in the little home is finished, the broom put back in its corner, the bowl of cold water set aside, the herb pouches hung neatly again, the whole room seems to settle by one more quiet heartbeat. And in that hush, your eyes drift naturally toward the children sitting on the straw bed, waiting. They sit close to one another, their small feet tucked under thick, coarse wool. In the oldest child's hands lies a scrap of wool cloth, perhaps once part of a shawl their mother wore when she herself was young. The fabric is worn thin but soft, holding the memory of many winters before. The younger child clutches a tiny herb pouch, a small bundle no bigger than a palm, tied with a simple hemp string. You can almost imagine the gentle scent of wild lavender and dried rosemary rising from it, spreading through the dark like an old-fashioned blessing for safe sleep. When everything is ready, the parents guide the children gently toward the center of the bed. No one explains it aloud, but you understand. The middle of the warm circle is the safest place of all. There, the children are wrapped by the bodies of the adults around them, as if placed inside a living nest made of skin, breath, and heartbeat. The thickest blanket, the heaviest one, the one patched most over the years, is always pulled over the children first. The father and mother smooth its edges carefully, flattening each fold, making sure no corner lifts, no tiny gap remains for cold air to slip through. They don't have much to give, but warmth, they give the most they have. And when the children finally lie down, the entire room changes. You hear soft breaths, small, even, delicate like summer wind passing over a quiet meadow. One child shifts. The straw beneath them rustles softly. Another burrows deeper into the blanket, releasing a faint pocket of warmth around them. These tiny movements, the unconscious motions of small bodies, are the sounds that make a winter night feel less bitter. When you really listen, you feel your own eyes grow heavier, lulled by that peaceful rhythm. People of the old world believed children carried a kind of heaven-given warmth, a heat not only felt on the skin, but in the spirit. Through the long winters, the faint sounds of a child's breathing made a house less lonely. The rustle of their sleep made tomorrow feel a little more possible. You look at the children lying in the darkness, surrounded by their parents, by wool blankets, by dry straw, by the warmth rising from the floor, and you see a simple, profound truth. Children live because of the warmth of their family, and the family lives because of the hope found in its children. That hope isn't made of grand dreams. It lives in the sight of a child sleeping peacefully. It lives in the sound of their steady breathing. It lives in the knowledge that no matter how long or harsh the winter may be, there is still a warm circle to return to. You inhale slowly, then let your breath out softly, as if your own rhythm merges for a moment with theirs. And in that quiet instant, history no longer feels distant. It feels close, intimate, like a warmth slowly sinking into your chest. And as you look around the house now fully swallowed in silence, you realize the story has reached its final moment. The moment when all the warmth has been gathered, all the rituals completed, and only the calm before sleep remains. And from that circle of shared warmth, the story guides you gently into its final chapter, where the night closes, the silence deepens, and you are invited to let your eyes drift softly shut. Looking back on the medieval winter night we've just travelled through, perhaps what stays with you isn't the biting cold, nor the hardships and the scarcity, but the way people lived back then, slowly, steadily, and deeply connected. They had no heaters, no modern comforts, not even steady light to chase away the darkness, but they had each other. the warmth of family, of community, of hands that never stopped caring for one another. That was what carried them through the longest winters. And, in our modern world, we sometimes forget that simple truth. We chase after so many things, only to overlook the small moments: a shared meal, an old conversation, a quiet night's sleep knowing someone is near. Their story reminds us that warmth doesn't come from a furnace. It comes from hearts that know how to share, not from possessions, but from presence. If there's one thing you take from this journey, let it be this: cherish the small things, the things that have kept us warm through every winter of life, past, present, and those still to come. Thank you for listening slowly, deeply, through this entire journey. If the story brought you even a touch of peace, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe so we can meet again in the gentle nights ahead. Wishing you the softest, most peaceful sleep.